right, well, we'll try this again. We finished up Genesis, book of Genesis. We're going to roll on and do Exodus a little bit here. We're going to start with chapters 1 through 4. Now, when we left off in Genesis, we had Joseph really sort of running Egypt. And at the end of that, at the behest of Pharaoh, told Joseph, yeah, bring your family in here and we'll give them the best land. And that was the land of Goshen. Then Joseph dies, and of course, because his position, he did not have any lineage or anything where someone from his family could take his position. He was kind of just given that by Pharaoh. So they really didn't have a power in the Egyptian hierarchy after Joseph. But they all liked Joseph. Everyone liked Joseph. And what happens is Joseph dies, and eventually, as time goes on, everyone forgets about Joseph and the Jews, and they're kind of wondering, how did these Jews get here? But it wasn't very much time. Now, from the end of Genesis chapter 50 to Exodus 1, there is a period of only 64 years. But as we're going to read here in Exodus 1, the Egyptians are kind of like, these Jewish people are really kind of starting to be a problem, starting to be a sort of a threat. Because the Jews were second-class citizens. They always were, even at the time of Joseph. They weren't Egyptian citizens, or however they calculated it, or whatever they were. They were kind of a group of people that lived in the land, but they weren't really part of the Egyptian culture. So we're going to start here, Exodus 1. Now these are the names of the children of Israel, which came into Egypt. Everyone, and man in his household, came with Jacob, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. And all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls, for Joseph was in Egypt already. Now there is in another place in the Bible it says 75, and that's Acts 7. In two places in the Old Testament it says there are 70 souls that came. Well, I take that as they're not counting Joseph because he was already in Egypt, and he had 2 sons and was married. And I guess we're missing a person between those 2 numbers, but to me that's not really that big of a deal. 75 people that make up the Jews at this point, that are descended from Abraham. And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, and multiplied and waxed exceedingly mighty, that the land was filled with them, breeding like rabbits. And now there uprose a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass, that when they falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies, and fight against us. So get them up out of the land. So they have this problem where they're growing so great, and there are so many of them, they actually become a pretty strong military force. And because the Egyptians know they don't follow the same, they don't worship the same God, they don't have any of the same Egyptian customs, they're kind of this foreign entity, but there's a lot of them. And even though they're not really necessarily scared of them trying to overthrow Egypt or anything, they're worried that they could team up with somebody who is an enemy of Egypt. Because they probably weren't getting treated that great before all the slavery stuff happened, because they were second-class citizens. Verse 11, therefore did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh treasured cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar, in brick, in all manner of service of the field, and in all their service wherein they made them serve with rigor. Oh, now we're kicking in with the slavery. We know that it was 64 years from the death of Joseph to the birth of Moses. Moses still has not been born at this point. Okay, so we don't really know where this is in that, but this is the gist of what's going on. And we do know that at the time of Moses, there was several million Jews. Now, granted, that was at time of Exodus, which is when Moses is 80 years old. So at this point in time, you wonder how much they multiplied in that 80 years. Verse 15, let's see. And the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah, and he said, When you do the office of midwife to the Hebrew women, set them up upon stools. If it be a son, you shall kill him, but if it be a daughter, you shall let him live. So, isn't that something? You're tasking Hebrew midwives now that, yeah, if you have any sons, kill them, and that's going to be your job. Expecting that the Hebrew midwives are going to do that? So it goes on to say that the Hebrew midwife said, no, we're not going to do that. And when Pharaoh asked them, what's the deal? How come you're not doing as I commanded? They say, well, we showed up and the baby was already born. Because the Jewish women are stronger than the Egyptians. So we showed up and the kid had already popped out. So it goes on to talk about because they lied to Pharaoh to protect their people, God blesses the midwives. Go on to chapter 2. And this is where we get into where Moses comes from. Was a man of the house of Levi, and took a wife and daughter of Levi. Woman conceived, bare a son, saw that she was a goodly child, and hid him 3 months. And after the 3 months, they could no longer hide him. So this is where they made they call it an ark in here, a little boat to put the baby in, and put him in the river. There you go. And this is where Pharaoh's daughter finds the child, and doesn't want to kill it, and hires a Jewish woman to breastfeed Moses until he's the age, and they adopt Moses more Pharaoh family. And when it goes from here, it goes straight to Exodus does not cover what Moses' upbringing was more or less like, but in Acts 7, which I'll read through in a little bit here, kind of puts in more specifics. Moses grows up to be about 40 years old, living as basically an Egyptian prince. At some point in that time, he knows that he is an actual Jewish person. Probably when it had to do with the coming of inheritance, and you look at the hierarchy of who gets what when so-and-so dies, and Moses isn't in there, he's probably like, what's going on? It's like, oh yeah, by the way, Moses, you're a Jew. So he really didn't have any power as any sort of any power or any heir as part of the hierarchy of Egypt. And you'll find out here that the Jews didn't like him either. And here, this is where, around verse 11, and it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out into his brethren, looked upon their burdens, and he spied the Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. And Moses looks around, and there's no one watching, so he kills the Egyptian. What ends up happening is he goes out the next day, and he sees the Jews, and he's like, why are you guys fighting with each other or whatever? Don't you know that you're brothers? And the Jews there tell Moses, oh, who are you for anything over us? Are you going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian yesterday? And Moses knows that he doesn't have a secret, and it's only a matter of time before the Pharaoh finds out. So Moses takes off. Go into chapter 3. Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire. So here we're at the point of, this is Moses' upbringing, what's going on with the nation of Israel, and how they're dealing with Egypt, and what happened to Moses. And this would be in chapter 3, 80 years after his birth. 40 years after he had killed the Egyptian. Now, I do want to bring in a thing of, at what point would these people that want to believe in Moses is the quintessential law, okay, in the Old Testament, where people put forth the idea that in the Old Testament people were saved by works, okay, I am wondering where exactly then Moses was saved. Was he saved for having faith in God? The reason, Moses, Acts 7 clears it up that Moses was waiting for God to free his brethren out there. The time when he was 40 years old and he killed the Egyptian, he was waiting for God to free them. And that's why he was asking the Jews why they're attacking their brother. Because he's saying, don't you guys know that God's going to free you here? Now, was Moses saved when he was 40? And then lost his salvation when he killed the Egyptian? And now he is saved again because he is following God's command to go return to Egypt to free his people? where does his salvation take place? Is it by faith or is it by works? We got the works guy right here. Now, that's just a little bit of a side. Okay, I know Gene came out with a video the other day that wants to keep saying that everybody's saved by works in the Old Testament, and that's just not true. Not true. I think we're going to take a look at Acts 7, where it's a mirror kind of parallel, adds a little bit more information to what's going on. Well, I guess we'll start around 14 or so. Then sent Joseph and called his father Jacob to him. This is Jacob moving into Egypt. 15 souls. This is where it says 75 people. Jacob went down to Egypt and died, he and our fathers. They were carried over Shechem and laid the sepulchre that Abraham bought. When the time of the promise drew nigh, which God had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt. Till another king arose, which knew not Joseph. This is what we're talking about here. And now we got to wonder, why were the Jews enslaved? Because it seemed like everybody was sort of blessed when they're going to Egypt. And the reason that they were in Egypt in the first place, remember, Abraham wasn't supposed to be there. Abraham sort of ended up in Egypt because of famine. And then his sons really didn't go anywhere. The initial promise was, go out into the wilderness and I'll show you a land of eat like milk and honey or something. That's the initial promise, but they didn't. They ended up in Egypt and they had a nice life and they just stayed there, which really wasn't exactly what God wanted them to do. Although we knew he would, because the prophecy he gave to Abraham, he explained you're going to be enslaved for 400 years. Sojourn in a land that is not yours. You know what was going on. Verse 19, the same dealt subtly with our kindred, and evil entreated our fathers, so that they cast out their young children to the end they may not live. In which time Moses was born, and was exceedingly fair, and nourished up in his father's house 3 months. And then when he was cast out, Pharaoh's daughter took him up, and nourished him for her own son. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was mighty in the words and deeds. So Moses was a smart guy, and rose in the ranks of the Egyptian hierarchy. He wasn't just some guy, some slave boy or something like that. And when he was a full 40 years old, it came to his heart to visit his brethren and the children of Israel. And seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended him and avenged him that was oppressed, and smote the Egyptian. For he supposed his brethren would have understood how that God by his hand would deliver them, but they understood not. So Moses was not only learned in Egyptian teaching, he also understood Hebrew and Hebrew teaching. When he found out that he was a Jew, he looked into all that and knew there was the prophecy that they would not be enslaved and God would get them out. And the next day he showed himself unto them, and they strove and would have set them once again, saying, Sirs, ye are brethren, why do ye do wrong to one another? But he that did his neighbor wrong thrust him away, saying, Who made thee a ruler and judge over us? Wilt thou kill me as you didst the Egyptian yesterday? Then fled Moses at this saying, and was a stranger in the land of Midian, where he begat 2 sons. And then 40 years expired, and now we have the burning bush. So that's what's going on with Moses. Moses sounds like he was a bigger believer, even though he was raised as an Egyptian, bigger believer in the true God than the actual Jews that were enslaved, because they were like, well, we're enslaved, God's not doing anything for us, I guess. I guess that was maybe their attitude. Hard to say at that time, but we look a little bit at the numbers here of the amount of people what we're talking about. Remember, we're starting with 75 people at the time of Joseph. And only 60 years later, that's 2 generations. Those 75 people multiplied into a big enough threat that they had to start doing some control measures. Egypt. They're like, these guys, oh man. I mean, what do you figure they had? 10,000 people? 20,000 people? 30,000 people? Because we know 80 years after that, so 144 years total from the death of Joseph to the Exodus, we know that they had 600,000 troops. That's in the book of Numbers, or this is a year after the Exodus. Verse 40, Numbers 1, verse 46, even all that they numbered 603,550. And this is just soldiers by the ages of 20 to 50, able-bodied people. So you would probably estimate the Jews around 3 million, if not more. Like typically today, combat people that could do combat is like 1/10 of the population. That's in our armed forces, if that even. Of course, things are different back then. You need to figure anybody under the age of 20, not mandatory military service, and anyone over the age of 50 is not mandatory military service. Now, this is men and no women. So you can immediately double that for women. That's 1,000,002. Another 1,000,000 for people under 20. No, maybe 500,000 for people over 50. So that's what we have really at the time of Moses. That's a lot of people. Coming from 75 people over the course of 100 years. And you got to wonder, the Egyptians, they must have been outbirthing the Egyptians like 10 to 1. Is why they were sought as a problem. And what we're going to do is here look up the areas that we're talking about right here. This is the land of Goshen. This hall here is Egypt. Okay, and here is part of the wilderness. This one has a line here for where they believe that the route that Moses took. There are a few different ideas about that as to where he actually went. Right here, this is the Red Sea. Two little outcroppings. See it in a different picture as well. These are where from that other picture, these are the two outcroppings. Red Sea, land of Goshen up here. Down here is Mount Sinai. So you figure they're coming down here and crossing the Red Sea somewhere around here, all through the wilderness to get to right here. Or they eventually go up and, boy, I can never remember the name of it, but the first city that Joshua attacked as they're conquering to try and get their land. Jericho. Jericho is right up here. Does not show on this map. I have another one here. This one big enough. This one here is the depiction based on research by Ron. I think his name is Ron Wyatt, who is a Seventh-day Adventist who has looked at all the different archaeological places based on the Bible where these places should exist, and found places like Sodom and Gomorrah. And in here, where we see this is the path of the Exodus, that what they believe it to be. Right here where they have the crossing of the Red Sea, we have the chariot wheels, bones. There's no real reason for chariots to be in the middle of the Red Sea, unless the Bible account is true. One could argue boats, but they didn't find any boats. There was apparently a lot of them. Gold-covered chariot wheels and lots of bones and armor and stuff like that. And this is where it's a pretty good bet that's where they crossed on this part, coming down through here. And of course, you got Mount Sinai is right here, so it makes sense. And up over here, probably can't see my cursor because it's off the screen, but that would be where Jericho is. Go out, start reclaiming their land. So that would be Exodus all the way through 3. We'll do Exodus 3 and 4 too. So God appears to Moses in a burning bush and says, "Hey, I got this job for you." And Moses is like, "Can't you pick somebody else?" I don't. Why do you think Pharaoh's going to listen to me? Why do you think the Jews are going to listen to me? You know, no one has any reason to listen to me. He's 80 years old. He's an old man, and he's a murderer back in Egypt. Why would they listen to him? And God explains to him, tell him I sent you, and here I'll show you that I'll bless you, give you these gifts that you can show to them as signs that you are coming from the true God. And he's like, well, who should I say sent me? And this is the point where God says, I am that I am sent you. That's where it comes from. So when people say that Jesus never said that he was God, okay, that's a big one out there that a lot of, like the Muslims will cling to, and a lot of dissenters out there will cling to. Well, Jesus never said he was God, so there you go. Well, Jesus said that before Abraham was, I am. He did say he was God. Most certainly said he was God. This is where you get the I am here in chapter 3, where he's talking with Moses. And he does get upset with Moses. Because Moses, even after all of these things, and he does the miracles and things, he's still like, but I can't speak in front of people. I mean, either he has a speech impediment, or he can't formulate his thoughts very well on the spot, or something like that. And God says, well, he gets upset. Anger is kindled in the Lord, and he says, well, Moses is a good, Aaron's a good speaker, Moses' brother. So I'll talk to you and you talk to Aaron, and that's how it's going to work. And Aaron's going to look at you as a god, and you're going to come to me as God. And so that's the situation that they have set up, that Aaron is the first high priest, and Moses is the prophet, who is working the miracles. Go on to chapter 4. Again, chapter 3 and 4 is kind of the argument. Moses arguing with God. This is where the anger of the Lord is kindled. So Aaron apparently is given a vision to go out and meet Moses, and they come into town together, and this is effectively the beginning of the Exodus. This is where what's coming up now is where Moses and Aaron will preach to the people, tell them what's going on, and then they say there's going to be, Moses has already been told the prophecy of the plagues that are going to happen. So Moses already knows what's going to happen. He relays this to the people, and this is into what Pharaoh's take is on it, what he thinks about it now. And start, what it sounds like is going on in the very beginning of Exodus, before Moses is born. It sounds like they were worried about the Jews and kind of wanted them to leave, weren't really sure what to do with them, and were kind of just making things kind of uncomfortable for them to stay in the country. I'd think almost like an extra Jew tax or something. Well, if you stay here, you got to help us build this stuff in order to stay in Egypt, that kind of a thing. And then gradually it became, okay, now you have to do these things. You have to make bricks for our structures. You have to do this. You have to do that. Otherwise, we're going to beat you or kill you or do whatever. And by the time we have the Exodus with Moses coming back, Moses coming 80 years later, the Jews and their slave labor is probably a big part of the Egyptian economy. Pharaoh's probably thinking, who's going to build my temples now? So they don't want to let the Jews go, despite all of the problems that they're going to have. And there's, of course, the prophecy here, too, that was told to Moses, is that Egypt is going to pay for the Jews to leave eventually, which is exactly what happened. They're like, oh, Ramses letting them go, and they're paying them. Here, take some money. Take some traveling money so you can stop at the gas station on the way out. We don't want you to get stuck and have to come back, because they're scared to death of these Jews. All of the things that they had to go through. And we'll get into the plagues next time on Bible Basics, and we're going to cover it pretty quickly because, most people have seen the movies and everything as far as the actual Exodus with Moses. The Bible mini-series does a pretty good job with it. So with that, are out of here. We'll see you next time.